Oh, glorious day. One of these days we're going to get to that oh, glorious day. Actually, we're going to get to that oh, glorious day more than one time. Say, really? How is that possible? Well, one day we're going to get to the oh, glorious day, really. But one day sooner than that, assuming the Lord tarries, we're going to get to the song oh, glorious day congregationally. So it's one of the songs that we're hoping to kind of get into our rotation there. Are you showing me something? Huh? Oh, okay. Sorry. All right, so we are beginning this morning a new series, kicking off a new series today, titled Lost and Found. And we're going to be in the book of Luke, chapter 15, for the entire month of May. So this is a study of 3 stories in the book of Luke. So you can begin turning there if you want. I actually drew, oddly enough, though we are covering Luke 15 for the month, I actually drew our memory verse for the month from Luke chapter 19. There's reasons for that. But so why don't we begin there? Would you read this aloud with me? We have our memory verse. It's Luke chapter 19 and verse 10. There on the right-hand side of your screen. Luke 19:10. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Not a terribly long verse, but a very important verse along the way. And if you have your program on the back, you'll see another quote that kind of ties that particular verse into this series. Let me ask you this question, though. How many of you have ever lost anything? How many of you like to lose stuff? How many of you are really good at it, though? When we lose something, we really want to find it. Case in point, you'll remember not that long ago, I was looking for my keys. Some of you know I was looking for my church keys. Eventually had to break into the shed because the only key to the shed is actually on my key ring. So I found my keys, of course, right after I broke the lock, naturally, right? I've actually subsequently lost my keys again. So if you see them wandering around, I really need to figure out some way to keep these keys someplace I can find them. Good news is I don't have to break into the shed again because it's still open. But when we find something, we usually really miss it. We really go looking for it. Have you ever found yourself saying, of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind the most? Parents could definitely understand that. Kids are going, what? Yeah, it happens. So when we lose things, we definitely want to go find them, and we usually invest or waste, depending on your perspective, a fair bit of time looking for them. Nothing like, finally finding the remote to the DVD player, only to find that it has no batteries and your quest begins again. You ever had that happen? You find the controller for your Xbox because it was in your room under something that you hadn't looked at in 2 months, and you find that it doesn't have batteries, and so you have to now go hunting for batteries. We lose our cell phones. It's amazing. We lose the things that we use most frequently. I do remember a story once I heard about Graham DeVitro, Kate's grandmother, who couldn't find her glasses. She was looking through them as she was looking for them. She lost them right on her face. Things happen, right? You get a little sideways in life sometimes, and it just, you go a little bit crazy. Turns out that God is actually no different. Now, God doesn't lose stuff. God doesn't lose things. Part of being God is that you know everything. We call it this great doctrinal word, omniscient, all-knowing. God knows everything. So what has God ever lost? Well, it turns out he's actually only ever lost the one thing that he cares most about in the universe, and that's kind of something that we can relate to. The one thing that God has lost is people. And it's not that he's lost track of them, but they are lost to him because they have chosen to walk away from him. That's kind of the rub in making people who can, choose to love you. They can also choose to not love you. Who can choose to walk with you. They can also choose to walk away from you. And so God does know what it is to feel that sense of loss, and at a greater at a greater level, really, than losing our keys or anything silly like that. God has lost people, but he invests no less time trying to get them back, trying to locate them, trying to get them back into relationship. And so we begin in Luke chapter 15. Now, Luke 15 it's an interesting chapter because there are 3 parables in Luke chapter 15, all of which are told to make the same point. A parable, by its definition, by its design, is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. That's all any of Jesus' parables always are. They're earthly stories. They're stories about life in the earth in general that we can get, but they have a heavenly meaning. They have some greater purpose, some greater teaching element that we can draw from. Now, Jesus wasn't one to mince words, and so he didn't often repeat himself. If you didn't get it the first time, he'd come back around at some other time. But for him to spend here in Luke 15 this time telling these 3 different stories, very different stories, really centered around one theme or one kind of recurring lesson, really illustrates for us the importance of what Jesus was trying to communicate, what he was trying to teach. We find in Luke chapter 15, in the first couple of verses here of Luke 15, we actually find, bless you, the context of these particular stories. So if you look with me, Luke chapter 15, in verse 1, then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he spoke this parable to them. And so the immediate context is both troubling and interesting. Because the immediate context of these stories is, here's Jesus, who is doing something that we're not surprised by. He is simply eating dinner. He's having a meal. But he's having this meal not with the religious elite of Jerusalem, but he's having this meal with tax collectors and sinners and the lower dregs of society, of people who aren't good enough to be into the higher echelons of society. Tax collectors were, and still I guess are, looked down upon to a great degree. Not that you would ever look down on one to their face, of course. But by and large, that was the response that people have always had. Various sinners, they would just lump it in there. Sinners. Oh, these people they're not godly people. They're not righteous people. They're not our people. They're just sinners. It's interesting to me and saddening, I think, how judgmental religious people tend to be. And it's one of those things that I don't have time for. I don't think Jesus had time for. I don't think it's an attitude that any real Christian has place for. Because Jesus wasn't concerned with the religious elite, those who were righteous in their own eyes. He didn't even bother with them except to yell at them every once in a while. Jesus went to where people who had needs were, where real people were. I think in our own selves it can be enlightening when we begin to look down our nose at the people around us. We should probably take account of where our nose is. When we start looking down our noses at people, when we start judging other people, that's not our place. The Apostle Paul, who was honestly outside of Jesus, probably the most righteous man who ever walked the earth, said over and over again, I don't judge anything because it's not my job. It's God's job. I'm just here to tell you what God said. That's our place, is not to judge people, but to love them. And here's Jesus. He's loving these people, and the religious people are looking down their noses. They're like, wow, we have already judged these people as not worthy, and Jesus, you're this rabbi, you're this religious leader wannabe, and you're out hanging with these people that are unworthy. Well, we're going to lump you in that category. And so Jesus gives these next 3 parables to them. The other context, and it's interesting, the first of these particular stories, the lost sheep that comes to us this morning, This is not the only place that Jesus gave this parable. We also find in Matthew chapter 18 that Jesus gave this parable a second time. Now, before we get to, oh, really? How many of you have ever repeated a story? You should all raise your hands. I've talked to you all enough to know that we all repeat stories, right? And if you've got a good lesson, don't let it die. And so Jesus actually in Matthew chapter 18, a different context, but he said to the people around him there, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones. There were some people who were rejecting children from coming to Jesus. And again, who was it that was doing this? It was in theory, religious leaders, but it actually wasn't. In this case, it was Jesus' own disciples who were trying to forbid children from being brought to Jesus. And Jesus has to turn around and scold his own disciples. Like, you guys should know better. See, take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that in heaven their angels are always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. Jesus said, I'm here to reach the reachable. I'm here to look for and to save those who are lost, whether they are the downcast of society or whether they are children or whoever is willing to receive me, whoever is willing to welcome me, whoever is willing to hear me, that's who I'm interested in reaching out to. And so he gave this very same parable to his own disciples later on to say, look, these people are important to me. And so we find these two references. We're going to focus on Luke chapter 15 because that's really our focus this month. But there are three reasons, if you will, that Jesus gave all three of these parables. And like I said, they have the same base message. And he gave all three of them for the same three reasons. The first reason was to combat religious attitudes towards the people that Jesus receives. That was the primary purpose. People were judging Jesus, and they were judging the people he received, and he wanted to combat negative attitudes that were being thrown at him by religious people about the people that he receives. And ultimately, what he's going to teach as he combats these attitudes is that those attitudes are not godly in any way, shape, or form. To reject somebody because of their social status, to reject somebody because of their sinful status, because of their inherent and evidentiary need of Jesus, to reject someone because of their age is not godly. And so Jesus gives these parables to combat that idea. Secondly, he gives the parables to inform us about the people he receives. As we look at these parables, we find something about, or several things about, the people that Jesus receives. And then lastly, it's to encourage us to receive them too. Ultimately, his point was to say, your attitude is ungodly, you should welcome them. You should receive them just as I do. Whoever it is you're looking down your nose at that says they're unworthy, whoever you're looking down your nose at and says they have a need, well, let me tell you, the godly attitude is to say they do have a need, and so I'm going to go meet it. I'm going to reach out to them. And so Jesus ultimately wants to take people whose attitudes are wrong, get them straightened out to right, so that they receive the people that Jesus receives in the same way that he does. And that's ultimately his goal. Because God wants to find those who are lost. They are valuable to him. And he really wants us to help him find them. You know what it's like when you're looking for something? You enlist everybody you can to help you, right? Like I just enlisted all of you to help find my keys. Now, they're probably in my briefcase, so don't look too hard. But you know what it is. You're finding the car keys, you can't find them, you're on your way to work, you're running late. Everybody stop what you're doing! Help me find my car keys. How many of you, we've done that, right? I'm not crazy? You've done that? And so you know, God values people. He values those who are lost. And he wants everyone to join in this search. Help him. So let me begin. Luke chapter 15. We'll pick it up in verse 4. And we'll read just down to verse 7 this morning. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which was lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who have no need of repentance. It's an interesting parable. There's a lot here that we could talk about, and we could definitely explore, sheep and flock sizes and grazing techniques and all of that. Here's what you can know. 100 sheep in Jesus' time is still a small to medium flock. It's respectable. It wasn't until you got over about 200 sheep that you considered a large flock. So, it's a fair-sized flock, right? Shepherds walk around looking for what? Grass. Because sheep like to eat. They are the veritable lawnmower. And they bag everything. Well, then they turn it to compost. But anyway, that aside, always looking for green pastures, looking for anything for sheep to eat. Now, in the Middle East, then like now, it was a bit of a warmer climate, and it was a bit of a drier climate. So finding grazing land for your sheep was always a challenge. And shepherds would range far and wide looking for pasturable lands for their sheep. How often do you think sheep get lost in this process? Probably happens. Here was the question I stumbled upon first. Forget all of the technical stuff and even the doctrinal stuff for a second. Step back with me a second and let's ask one really simple question. Knowing what we know, because our knowledge of shepherding is vast, right? We're smart people. How do sheep get lost? How do sheep get lost? I mean, it's a simple question, right? Yeah, knowing what you now know of shepherding, which is just about all I know. How do sheep get lost? And we think about sheep. Okay, so here's what else I know about sheep. Sheep are incredibly strong. You ever seen, half a dozen sheep pull a tractor trailer? I have. They actually can. They're very strong. Sheep are also very stupid. I mean, dumb as a brick. Really, it's that bad. How do sheep get lost? What is the singular obsession that sheep have? Food, right? Let's be honest. They want to eat. They want to drink. Sheep are always looking for grass to eat. And that's really their primary focus in life. It's just, eat. Head down, eating. And they keep their face kind of close to the ground, and their eyes are pretty close to their mouth. And just like if you were eating literally off the ground, you wouldn't see a heck of a lot, would you? Because you're just looking at the ground. You're looking at what's around you. And you're always just looking for your next bite. Sheep don't really pay a lot of attention to other concerns. They're focused on grass. They're focused on eating. They're focused on where their next bite is going to come from. And they're following the grass wherever the grass happens to go. And with their eyes so close to the ground, do they see dangers? No. You could have 100 feet from where a sheep is, a lush, very much greener, very much sweeter grass. And they're probably never going to know. Unless the current blade of grass happens to point them in that direction. They just kind of follow the meal. How often do sheep wander off? It happens. Right? Because all they're paying attention to is, I want to eat, I want to eat, I want to eat. I want to meet this need that I have to eat. I'm going to eat, I'm going to follow it, and I'm going to take a bite, I'm going to take a step, I'm going to take a bite, I'm going to take a step, I'm going to take a bite, I'm going to take a step. They're not worried about where the rest of the flock is. They're not worried about where the shepherd is. They're not worried about where the dangers are. They're just following one bite after another. And next thing you know, they've wandered off. Did they mean to wander off? Did they set out to wander off? They just kind of followed one bite after another, trying to eat. Can't hardly blame them for that. In this story, all the stories, what was lost represents people. The people that God has lost. And the story tells us something about people who are lost. How did they get that way? Most lost people are just following whatever's right in front of them. It's not like they set off to be ungodly. It's not like they set off to hate God, to follow after something else. They just set off to meet the need that was immediately in front of them, to put food on the table, to meet some need that they had. They took a bite, they took a step. They took a bite, they took a step. Sometimes diversions come up and they follow those diversions a little bit. But again, and this sounds insulting, we're inherently stupid. There's really no way to sugarcoat that one. We just follow the diversion until we, get hungry again, and then we start eating again, and we follow, take a bite, take a step, take a bite, take a step. Many of the people that we know who are lost to God didn't set off to be lost. They just set off to meet whatever basic need was in front of them. They just kind of wandered away. It just kind of happened. And it's interesting because here's Jesus sitting, dining with publicans and sinners. And his assessment of the people around him wasn't that they were heinous and anti-God. It was just that they were people who were trying to meet their own needs and kind of wandered away in a lot of various directions. Not intentionally evil, but just eating, stepping, eating, stepping. They just kind of wandered away. That's how sheep get lost. Just the routine of life led them in a different direction. Now, second question that occurs to me as I go through this, kind of obvious to me, but how do lost sheep get found? This is an idea, right? I would love to know how lost keys get found. If anybody has so they beep, let me know. How do lost sheep get found? Now, once the sheep is separated from the flock, wandered off someplace, if it actually looks up and around and suddenly finds itself alone, what does it do? It's not like shepherds wear GPS signals and, sheep have little screens in front. They go, oh, I'll just go this way. Right? You ever seen a sheep like that? That would be cool. Doesn't happen, even today. So how do lost sheep get found? Well, Jesus actually gives us the answer in this story. Jesus, as the shepherd, leaves the 99. He's like, I know where 99 out of 100 sheep are, and most of us would be like, that's fine. I've got 99% of my bases covered. That's within my margin of error. I'm good. God isn't that way, and thank him that he's not. So he says, I'm going to leave my 99 where I know where they are. Those who are found, I'm going to leave them found. And I'm going to go look for the one who's lost. Lost sheep do not find themselves. Lost sheep only get found if someone goes looking for them. And in this particular case, that someone is Jesus. He goes looking for those lost, or that lost sheep. That's Jesus' role in this story. He's the shepherd. In fact, he's the good shepherd, the great shepherd. He is so concerned about the sheep who are lost versus the sheep who are found that he actually left his home to come out here looking. He left heaven to come to earth to find the sheep who were lost. And at great personal sacrifice, because we, in our lost state, were separated from God. The choices that we made, the life that we live, separate us from God. And the only thing that could bring us back would be Jesus dying in our place for our sins. because it was the only way that we could be reconciled back to God. And Jesus is so concerned, so obsessed with finding sheep that he paid that price. That he said, not only will I go looking, I will make sure that I can bridge that gap. And so Jesus goes looking for sheep. He said it this way in John chapter 10 and verse 11. I love verse 10. Come that you might have life. You might have it more abundantly. But he goes on to say in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And so Jesus goes looking for the sheep because it's the only way for the sheep to be found. It's the only way for us to be restored in relationship with the Father. It's the only way for us to be found. It's the only way for anybody who's lost in our world today, who's just wandered away from God, to be found. As he goes to look for them, to find them, to draw them back in. How do sheep get lost? They just wander away, obsessed by meeting their daily needs. Just the routine decisions of life. They've walked away. How do they get found? Well, somebody's going to have to go look for them. Jesus, the great shepherd, has gone looking. He desires that we would join him in the search. Just like we desire somebody to help us find our keys. He says, hey, would you help me find this thing of great value? So we're actually pressed, enabled to join him, looking for sheep. Here's the third question that kind of occurred to me, is this: how important is it to find lost sheep? Is it really that important? I mean, you think about it, 99 sheep were found. I mean, 99% of your flock is fine. Isn't that good enough? What's God's answer? No, it's not. It's important enough that he would leave the 99 to go and find the one that was lost. You see, God deals in individuals, not in groups. God's concern isn't that he got most of everybody. It really is that he gets everybody. There is no one person who is not worth it to God. We live in a planet today that is populated by 7+ billion people. We can't even count that high readily. I mean, I know you know how. And were you to spend enough time, you could get there. But by and large, none of us have ever done it. We can't conceive of a number that big in our physical space. We're just too finite. That's too big a number. God not only can conceive of 7 billion people, he knows every one of their names. And if Jesus was telling the truth, he actually knows how many hairs is on the head of every one of those 7 billion people whose names he knows. Granted, some people it's easier to count than others. But still, how many of you know how many hairs are on your own head? I'm vain, and even I haven't counted that. I don't really want to know. I think the number's going down. You see, God loves each and every individual person and knows them. And he is looking for each and every individual person. Could you imagine the analogy? You know, we think of, here's the shepherd leaves the 99 to go find the one. What would it be like to the shepherd who knew where one of them was and lost 99? Do you think the sense of urgency might be kicked up a bit? Because in our world today, that's really closer to the number, isn't it? It's like there's 1% that are found, and there's 99% that are lost. how much more rapidly, how much more readily would the shepherd leave the one to go find the 99? And we get a sense of the scope of urgency at that point. The shepherd values. How important is it to find lost sheep? From God's perspective, it is paramount. There is no higher concern. He keeps the universe spinning only so that he can find the lost sheep. Sustains life only so that he can find the lost sheep. The point that Jesus wanted to get across to his skeptics, his judges, is simply this: lost people aren't horrible, they're just lost. Lost people aren't horrible, they're just lost. You know, we think of the term ungodly and we always assume it means terrible people. It really just means people without God. People who wandered away. That doesn't make them horrible people. That doesn't make them, undesirable in any way. They're just lost. And God just wants them to be found. And he looks to you and I as his children. And he says, hey, would you help me find what I value but have lost? It's important to me. It's interesting, verse 7, how he kind of closes this. That there will be rejoicing in heaven more for the one sheep who is lost and found than the 99 who didn't need to be looked for. The shepherd celebrates when he finds the lost sheep. What makes Jesus happy? What fulfills the heart of God? So whenever a sheep is found, there is a celebration that occurs. That's how important it is. That's how urgent it is. That's how high a priority it is for God. So the question naturally flowing from this particular parable is, what should our response be? Because many of us were, once upon a time, lost sheep. We weren't horrible. We were just lost. And through various ways and various means, I've heard most of our stories, God made sure that we were found. So what should our response be as one of the found sheep? What should we do? Where should we focus? And what's sad is that many of those who are in this camp of the found, as we saw in Matthew 18, become the religious. We become the judges. That's never what he wanted for us to become. He wanted for us to become the seekers. He wanted for us to become those who go looking for those who are lost. That really should be what our focus is. You think about it this morning. We sit here in the town of Rentham. We sit, and as hard as it is, because we're kind of in this semi-rural area, there are at least 3 farms within a mile from here. Very, kind of rural area. It's almost hard to imagine that within a 5-mile radius of where you're sitting right now, there are upwards of 125,000 people. But that's what the demographics say. That's the census data suggests. That within 5 miles of where you are sitting right now, there are 125,000 people at a minimum. The number's probably gone up since last I looked. How many of those 125,000 people are lost? What should we as a church do? I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, we should probably try to find some. That make sense? We should probably, and here's the thing, that's not a herd effort. That's not a group thing. That's not like we should all just go looking for one. When you're looking, you ever go looking for something and every one of you go to the same place? Like, I lost my keys. The whole family's suddenly in the bathroom looking in there. As if our bathrooms could hold 5 or 6 people. Maybe some of you can. That's fine. You're all in the car looking, Or you're all in the closet, like climbing over top of each other trying to find something? Is that how you look for stuff? Where you're like, okay, you look at the bathroom, you look at the closet, you look at the car, you look over. Kind of separate a little bit, right? Cover more ground. It's the same thing. God sends us as individuals looking in the areas where we go, knowing that we're going to different areas, but for the same purpose, that we would find those who are lost. The Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. Our memory verse reminds us. And that's our goal as a church, corporately, as individual parts of this church, as those who are the found. We would begin to look for those who are lost. They're never going to find their way back to God apart from somebody finding them. We're supposed to be the searchers, the seekers, the watchers. But ultimately, it's up to us. Is it important to us to look? Or are we just going to celebrate the fact that we're found? That's a decision I can't make for you. Just stand together with me this morning as we close. Father, we are grateful that you know us individually and that you love us without reservation. We're thankful that once upon a time, we who were lost were found. That you sent somebody into an area, and they found us. And they were able to lead us to you. Father, would you help us see the need of the people around us? But they're not horrible people, they're just lost. That the cares of life have just caused them to walk away. Without somebody to point them back in the right direction, they'll never get there. Would you help us as the found to be the ones who go looking for them, who go pointing them back to you? Help us to draw those who are willing back into your fold. Father, would you help us to look up from our own grazing from time to time to see the need before us? Well, thank you in Jesus' good name.